different guests and different people from different aspects of life. And like I said, my name is Lance Sani Banda. And of course, this evening, co hosting with my usual co host, Chaza. Chaza, good evening and welcome to the program.
Good evening, Lance, and I'm glad to be here.
Great. And of course, to you, our dear viewer, remember that you are following us from Facebook on our page, Ubuntu Channel Zambia, as well as on our Twitter space or on our Twitter, which is Ubuntu Channel Zambia, as well as YouTube, Ubuntu Channel Zambia. Now, this evening, we get to discuss democracy as we get to look at different aspects and affiliates of democracy, or maybe just getting to look at democracy itself. And my guest, or our guest this particular evening, is Liam, who is a political commentator. I call him a renowned political commentator because of the great milestones that which he has managed to achieve. Liam, good evening. Welcome to the program. Kindly unmute yourself. All right. As our guest is unmuting himself, okay, Liam, are you able to hear me?
Yes, I can hear you, Lance. Can you hear me?
Yes, now can hear you. Good evening and welcome to Ubuntu channel.
Thank you very much, and thanks for having me.
All right, great. For people or for the sake of the viewership of Ubuntu, they are hearing from you for the very first time. Let's get to have a brief background. Who exactly is Liam and how did you become a political commentator, or so to put it, an African political commentator?
Uh, First things first, Lance. One, I'm a former student leader from Zimbabwe. I studied for a bachelor's of social science in political science from the mid. Then afterwards, I pursued a postgrad diploma in labor law and labor economics. However, during all this, since I told you already, I started as a student activist in ZINASU, which is the Zimbabwe National Students Union. I also started a blog, which is called The Big Pen, and a column in the Zimbabwe Independent, commenting on Southern African politics and geopolitics generally. And following
I
Zambian
can't.
politics. Can you hear me?
So at some point,
Can you hear me?
yes, I can hear you now.
Yes. So, like I said, I've been following Zambian politics ever since the election of President Hichilema closely, and I also followed.
Mhm.
I was also a key observant of Zambian politics during the times of President Lungu himself, and during the times of President Levi Mwanawasa, because during the time when President Levi Mwanawasa was in office, that is the time where a hope of democratic breakthrough was possible in Zimbabwe through regional solidarity and the role played by Southern African states. And President Levi Mwanawasa was one of the key people that called President Robert Mugabe to order when he was rigging elections in Zimbabwe. So because of that and because of the history of our countries, I've been very interested in the
Hmm.
politics of both Zambia and Zimbabwe and Zambia, but also keenly following the developments occurring in Zambia as an interested person, because the democracy in Zambia is an impact of what unfolds in the democracy in Zimbabwe.
Hmm. All right. Now, to you, our dear viewer, remember that you will be getting in touch with us by leaving a comment underneath this broadcast. Leave a comment, or better still, shortly we'll be sharing with you the studio link where you can click on it, join us into the studio, and let's get to discuss this great topic that we are discussing. Is Zambia's democracy backsliding? This is our topic of discussion in question form, which our guest will be answering, as well as you, our dear viewer, might be able to take part and answer by obviously having reference to referrals that you can put in or put across right here on this very program. Now, Liam, quickly, let's get to obviously get to answer this question. Is Zambia's democracy backsliding, owing to the fact that you have been a keen follower of Zambia as a democratic country, its democratic tendencies, and also not forgetting how it has been performing and doing its politics. Do you think that Zambia's democracy is backsliding? Liam, are you here? All right, I can't seem to get to hear Liam or get what he is saying. Hey, of course, you are still watching Ubuntu channel. This is Meet Your Leaders, the program that comes your way every Wednesday on this particular platform, and we bring to you different guests with different topics as we strive to make sure that we get to inform you and of course educate you on certain things, or educate one another on certain things which are of public interest. And of course, this particular broadcast is coming to you direct from Lusaka, and our guest this particular evening is obviously a political commentator coming through from Zimbabwe that has followed Zambia's politics and, of course, Zambia's democratic tenets, and obviously getting to see one or two things which he might have learned from that, and other things pertaining or obtaining from that. Liam, do I have you back?
Lance, hello, can you hear me?
Yes, I can hear you.
Okay, I had to actually join with a different device because of network. Um Pardon me, because of the rains, my connection has been a bit disturbed. However, I did not get the question. You said, is Zambia's democracy backsliding? Is that it?
Yes, yes.
Uh, First things first, I would say, um, if we are to use the dictum of President Hakainde Hichilema's tenure as president or head of state of Zambia, it will not be enough to then just conclude that Zambia's democracy is backsliding. But if you are to analyze it from the perspective of, ever since the the first change of government in Zambia, or ever since independence, Zambia's democracy has been moving backwards in an opposite direction. Yes, then we can have a fair conversation about it. But also, I'll also be fair enough on the Zambian people to say, ever since President Hakainde Hichilema took over power, there's been an entrenchment of a police state where the police has been used as an institution to suppress dissenting voices and to curtail the right to freedom of assembly, especially amongst opposition parties and social movements that tend to try and hold government to account or speak truth to power. That is true. And that itself is a symbol of democratic backsliding, or that is a symbol that shows that our democracy is moving backwards in Zambia. But, or in fact, however, this is not a novel problem. It's not a new issue or a new conversation. This is actually a very old conversation that we should have, because it even goes back to the time of the MMD when they were in government, when President Frederick Chiluba was in government, where after successfully uh, defeating the one party state agenda by President Kenneth Kaunda, he actually went back and started to stifle uh, the rights of opposition and human rights defenders, self-organizing groups in the country, the civic space or the democratic space was closing. It was shrinking under President Chiluba. And so it also carried on because I'm very sure that the failures of President Chiluba, even after he died, are the ones that led to the fall of the MMD. You see, at least there was an element of attempting to do that. But even when the PF came in during the terms of President Michael Sata, the terms of President Rupia Banda, the democratic space in Zambia was still a conversation to question, especially on how the opposition is treated, how civil society is treated, all those things. So we should also be fair enough to analyze that it's a problem that started from even the times when the MMD was in power, right? And it shows that Zambia has been failing to consolidate democracy. When I say it's failing to consolidate democracy, I'm saying we're failing then to put in place the systems that allow us to reform and allow our democracy to mature as Zambia.
Now, maybe just some food for thought for somebody watching out there and listening. Should there be should or is there something that should be out there which can be put as a bar for somebody to compare whether democracy is thriving or backsliding in a particular country? Because here you've gone back to when Zambia was in one party state, and you've taken us through up to where President Hakainde Hichilema is now. What is that bar which we are looking at, or to compare, or to see, to say this is the bar that democracy connotes of, but it is not being reached? Instead, people's rights are being infringed, or maybe the backsliding of democracy in this country is because of A, B, C, D. What is the connotation which should be there, set as a bar to look at and say, this is what democracy looks like, and currently in Zambia, it does not look like this?
Lance, are you there?
Yes,
okay.
I'm here.
Okay, so what we can use is, one, there is international law, there are international conventions and treaties to which Zambia is a signatory to. Then also there are recommended best practices, not just by international bodies, but also by various scholars of politics and governance in the country. Then there are also public expectations, right? And then there is the Constitution of Zambia itself. I remember that the Constitution of Zambia pronounces Zambia as a democracy, right? And it also pronounces that Zambians have the right to freedom of assembly, freedom of expression, freedom of speech, freedom of choice, and there's freedom of participation in politics and governance, right? Then we also look at the ICCPR, the International Covenant on Civil and Political Rights, with the Universal Declaration of Rights. And 2 months ago, we were celebrating the anniversary of the Universal Declaration of Rights. And all these allow for the respect and promotion of human fundamental rights and the fair treatment of people, right, in all countries across the road. And then we have the Maputo Protocol and the Banjul Declaration of the African Union in SADC. So all these are things that we use to then compare the situation in Zambia versus what they say. And all these say that there should be the respect of the people's fundamental rights, like I said, freedom of participation, freedom of expression, freedom of assembly. Then we look at freedom of assembly here in Zambia. Like I said, the police is being used to curtail the citizens' ability to utilize or enjoy this right. You see that the police deny people permits to demonstrate, they deny opposition parties permits to hold rallies, they even disrupt them. You see, at gunpoint, they move armed trucks. Last time when young people wanted to protest against the high cost of living, those 2 young men were vilified and labeled that they're being paid by the PF. At the same time, police were deployed to come and close roads along Great East Road. And an NGO's office was barricaded by police trucks. You see, it was sealed by police trucks. So that itself can show you that, no, Here, the right to freedom of assembly, the right to freedom of protest, the right to freedom of expression is being closed. And that means that now, from the dictum of that, yes, Zambia has a record of holding free and fair elections with peaceful transition of power. But after having those peaceful transitions, we are then going back to dictatorial tendencies, and we are not then allowing people to oppose the newly and freely elected government. So, which then pronounces the pursuit of a de facto one-party state agenda. When you say a de facto one-party state agenda, we're saying there is the mentality of operating like Zambia has only one political party, and that is the party in government. Yet there are others, but this is only seen when those other political parties are not allowed the space to carry out their activities, especially when they are seen to be competitively against government. Then we also use the idea of seeing that after what happens when people try to criticize government, and what happens to the issue of state accountability. How is the state accountable? Because remember, when President Hakainde Hichilema came into power, there was a crisis of an increased rate in poverty, and which was affecting the majority of the people living in urban setups. If I remember well, the Zambian poverty was getting to close to about 50%, right? And even the price of mealie meal was still an issue. The standard cost of living itself, before we talk about the price of mealie meal, was still an issue. I'm not so sure how much it was during President Lungu because I was not yet in Zambia. But when I came in here, when I came to Zambia, under President Hakainde Hichilema, it was close to 300 kwacha, and it later reduced because of the introduction of the ZNS mealie meal. But however, people complained about the standard cost of living and the increase in fuel prices to almost 30 kwacha. And this itself prompts an economy where, because remember, Zambia is one of the best performing economies in Southern Africa at the moment. But when that best performing economy is not accessible to the poor or the general public, it therefore becomes undemocratic and exclusive. So that's another measurement of looking at the economic aspect and the political aspect. Are people in the country enjoying their rights? Are people in the country favored by the economy? No, because the current setup is creating marginalization. So it becomes undemocratic. And that's how we get to say, okay, this is the bar to which we can then conclude that Zambia's democracy is backsliding. But what does a perfect democracy look like? Or what does a good democracy look like? It is one which citizens can express themselves freely, fairly, without fear or favor of being victimized by the government, where even opposition parties, not for the sake of them being opposition parties, but for them being parallel partners and alternative voices to what the government should do, are allowed to speak, they are allowed to self-organize, they are allowed to gather and give their feedback to people. And also when people are freely allowed to associate with opposition parties. And why do I say that when people are freely? Because I've noticed that the people are not freely allowed to associate with opposition parties. Because when you hear the Inspector General of the police in Zambia say that socialism will not work, he's pronouncing an ideological and highly politically inclined stance on behalf of the establishment, which is wrong, because the police should not descend into the arena of politics. The police should remain an institution with integrity that does not curtail the rights of others. So the police cannot be a machinery tool used to repress the rights of others. So which is why I would put that even the conduct of state institutions and the way that duty bearers behave, inclusive of those that are in government, can be used as a measure of what the state of democracy is, and we compare it to international standards and international laws and the treaties to which Zambia is a signatory to, as I have outlined before.
Okay, now after speaking about that, talking about that, each and every party or each and every government that comes in when it's in the opposition, it obviously talks about how people are pressed and oppressed by the ruling party, and obviously promises heaven on earth to the people or to the would-be voters that would vote for them. This we have seen and witnessed when in opposition, we saw the UPND suffering police brutality. We saw them suffering, obviously, an issue of them being curtailed, not allowed to move freely, not allowed to talk, also not allowed to do any mass gathering of any political nature. After getting into power, we have seen
Can
certain.
you rephrase the last part?
Sorry, Liam, are you able to hear me?
Yeah, can you rephrase the last part? I lost you there. You were breaking off.
Oh, okay. So I was saying that the UPND, when in opposition, they were curtailed in terms of movement, free movement, holding mass political rallies, or just talking. They were curtailed, and we saw that happening during the time when they were in opposition. This time around, they are in power, and they promised the people of Zambia to rule by the rule of law, and also to start the process of amending the Public Order Act. But now we see a different turn where the same Public Order Act is being used against the opposition. The same things that the UPND went through is what the current opposition is going through. When asked, the UPND respond that whether the law is good or bad, they'll still use the current law because it is the law. Is this a sign or symptom of democracy backsliding?
Lance, yes, that is a symptom of democracy backsliding because one, when a political party gets into power and forms a government, while there's an unjust law, and if they do not repeal that law and still apply it for the sake of that, it still exists, and there is no urgency or there is no agency in reforming that law, or at least repealing it and replacing it with a progressive one, that shows that they are benefiting from the entrenched system of oppression, then that's democracy backsliding. Because remember, they get into power on an account of trying to initiate democratization and on an account that they benefited from a democratic process of elections. And then they start to do undemocratic things. That shows which is preserving evil legislature, like the Public Order Act of Zambia, the NGO Act, and the Cyber Crimes Act. Those are evil pieces of legislation. They are called draconian and archaic, and they curtail the rights of the people. And if they maintain it for the sake of that, it is still the law. And they are not making any urgent moves to try and reform that law. Because I've not heard any debate about reforming those laws that I've outlined so far. So that means our democracy is backsliding. And it is the lack of empathy, and it will be very dishonest. It's a crookish mentality for a government that came on the background and backdrop of democracy to come and then fail to reform the undemocratic laws and systems that were oppressing them, especially when they use it against an erstwhile opponent or the opposition that used to be government. But it's also a lesson. You see, it's also a lesson to the PF. It's also a lesson to President Lungu and the PF cadres. It's also a lesson to them that, you see, when we encourage leaders to be democratic and when we encourage leaders to reform the system, we are not speaking from a perspective that we just want freedom to criticize them, or we are not threatening their power. But we're saying they should also imagine a time when they're in opposition. Now the PF is facing their medicine, they're testing their medicine while in opposition. And they want to get back into government fast, because they feel the pain of being in opposition under the system that they created. So in the end, our democracy is backsliding. But if you ask my opinion, I'll tell you that I don't think even if the PF comes back into government, they'll change that law. They'll still want to be vengeful to their opposition as well if they make it at all. So the problem also comes with there is this common crisis or common pandemic amongst new dawn governments, that they always have a phobia and a mentality of vengeance towards their predecessors. They always try to make them feel what they went through when they're in opposition, and fearing that they might come back, so they try to eliminate them as possible. The UPND benefits from the current state of the law because it replaces the PF, it destroys the PF, and it eliminates the PF for good. Because this is what is leading the PF into a state of chaos at the moment. And then when the PF cannot gather, when the PF cannot mobilize, the PF is stagnated. It cannot even speak to its constituencies. It might gain public sympathy, but still, people will always fear retribution from the current government. So they will not associate with the PF, and that's how it's getting demobilized. And that's how the PF is being decapacitated from standing a chance in 2026. I'll tell you, if a situation like this continues until 2026, we will not have a PF to talk about. But that's not a good thing. I still feel like even if dictatorial political parties are pushed out of power, they should still be allowed a chance to reform. They should still be allowed a chance to learn of what democracy should look like. They should still be allowed their freedom, because they are also citizens of this free country. So that is why I would say, because President Hichilema is failing to treat the opposition and even allow democratic principles to prevail, he still is backsliding from democracy, even if he came on the thesis of promoting democracy. Because remember, Zambians voted for him as a way to correct the error that was being made by the previous leadership. So if he goes back now to do what the same previous leadership was doing, he is backsliding and is threatening the democracy of the Zambian people.
Now, still speaking of the PF, and since they've been brought, in the picture, currently we are seeing the PF undergoing or going through some form of, intra-party confusion, where we've seen Mao Sampa coming up with his own PF as president, and then also we are seeing the Given Lubinda-led Patriotic Front, and then quickly it has that drama has even unfolded into the House, where MPs are supposed to make laws, where we have seen the leader of opposition being changed from the one that was voted by the opposition Patriotic Front, Honorable Mundubile, to Honorable Chavinga as the leader of the House, as rather a leader of the opposition in the House. How does this emanate, or how does this look on our democracy as a country, owing to the fact that the Speaker of the National Assembly received two letters of notification, one from PF1 and the other one from PF2, but still went ahead and recognized only one letter and left out the other letter? What do you make of this, and where is our democracy here? Are we hanging on a balance?
Lance, there are three levels of analysis here, but firstly, let me respond. Yes, we are hanging on a balance, but not necessarily because the PF is in chaos. Just hanging on a balance because of a Speaker of Parliament who did not allow the opposition the right to be heard, the administrative right to be heard, and did not use rational, I can say, did not use the accurate political rationale to determine opposition in a state of chaos, and they need time expedience, which is how a lot of speakers of parliament across the region in Southern Africa have failed to lead their house with impartiality. Now let's get to the second tier of analysis, the PF. Pandemic, or the lose of politics. You see, the problem with political leaders, especially in populist movements, is that they entrench a personality cult, and that's what Edgar Lungu succeeded in doing. He entrenched a personality cult, and he made himself the only foot forward for the PF. And the PF took too long to convene a convention after President Lungu resigned from active politics, to replace the leadership, or their failure to renew leadership, or to change leadership on time, is that which has led them here, in the name of their arrogance as well. And there are people that will be always disgruntled by the state of things. You see, there are people that has been disgruntled by the state of things, like Mao Sampa. I remember that Mao Sampa I think this was his third time contesting for PF presidents. He even contested President Lungu in 2014 at a convention which he lost. So whenever you fail to do the right thing on time, you create avenues for other people to become heroes of a totally different struggle in a totally different moment. And that is what the PF is suffering right now. Then the second thing comes to the arrogance of the PF as an opposition movement. They are too arrogant. They are to assume that they will remain in control of the state of things even after losing elections. Because this was expected to happen. That if President Lungu loses the elections, it's going to be challenged. And I don't know why the PF did not foresee this coming. I will not even talk about Socialist Party because they're still trying to find their foot in the political arena. But the PF should have moved fast to rectify the leadership question when President Lungu said that he's leaving active politics. And President Lungu himself should have accepted to be humble and understand that maybe he's more useful to the nation of Zambia as a former president, because now he's going to be like an Ian Khama, a former president will be persecuted by his successor, and he's bound to live in exile. You see? So those are the three tiers of analysis that we should use to this. And all this, what it does is that the person who suffers the most is the voter, Lance. The voter, the person who voted for PF, the PF MPs in the various constituencies that they've won, the people depending on PF to put the policies, the pro-PF policies in place, are the ones disadvantaged. The 19 constituencies that have lost MPs through suspensions right now are the ones that are suffering the most, while political elites are suffering in their arrogance and their failure to address things on time. So the PF also is disorganized as an opposition party, and it is not proving to be viable.
All right. Quickly, let's get to our neighboring countries. Your country of origin, Zimbabwe, just came from an active election, which many people have called a disputed election. President Hakainde Hichilema, President Hakainde Hichilema, through he is using his position as the leader of the Troika, or Southern African chief security man. He appointed a former vice president of Zambia, Dr. Nevas Mumba, as the one to lead SADC election observer or observations in Zimbabwe. Dr. Mumba's remarks or report, or should I say SADC report, brought a lot of talks, lots of talk, and it brought about different emotions that came out because of the report which SADC had compiled and was read by Dr. Mumba. Do you think Zambia and Zimbabwe's relationship is shaking because of the report that was just delivered by Dr. Mumba? Or what could be the situation? What could be the implications of whatever dust that has been raised from these elections and obviously the Observer Mission report?
Lance, can you come again on the last part about the relationship?
Yes. So I'm saying, what implications does this have, on the relationship between the two countries? Looking at the fact that we have heard, the pro Mnangagwa saying the president of Zambia had sponsored, the SADC observers to push a certain agenda. Yes.
All right. Sorry to cut you there, Lance. So I'll be straight to the point. One thing I'll tell you is that my brothers in ZANU-PF in Zimbabwe committed a diplomatic blunder, and I will put it in no uncertain terms that was stupid. Forgive my language, but that was stupid of them. That was very shallow and irresponsible, especially of a party in government, to make such claims. You can't make conspiracy theories tainting another president, a fellow counterpart, as either a puppet or sponsoring an agenda. Then the second thing I'll say is, it's not true that President Hakainde Hichilema sponsored the report, because he has no power to do that. Remember, the Southern African Development Committee SADC itself is a conglomerate body that is constituted by diplomats from 16 or if not 15 different Southern African countries, and they all act autonomously and independently, and they take an oath to serve with truth and honesty and integrity. You see? And the first thing that the report said, tell me something. Section 67 of the Zimbabwean constitution says everyone has the right to free and fair elections, right? In free and fair, we mean even the conditions to contest should be fair. But did you know that for one to become an MP in Zimbabwe, you have to pay $1,000 to contest that as a nomination fee to the Zimbabwe Electoral Commission, and for you to be president, you have to pay 20,000. For a country like Zimbabwe, with 70% of its people living in poverty and 50% of its candidates, so that is not free and fair, and that is unconstitutional. And at the same time, ballot papers were delivered late, especially in opposition strongholds. That is in Harare and Bulawayo, in urban centers. And itself, that made the election for an organization created by the Central Intelligence Organization in Zimbabwe, which was meant to campaign for President Emerson Mnangagwa. And that was, they were holding exit polls with ZANU-PF regalia at polling stations. And the rules in the Electoral Act of Zimbabwe says you are not allowed to put political party regalia at polling stations during voting day. You're not allowed to campaign. So when you put political regalia at a polling station, even if you're conducting an exit poll, you're campaigning. And already, why would you ask people where they voted for? When we say the vote, one's vote is secret, it's a secret ballot. So already the election was not free, and those of the African Union. So Vice President Nevas Mumba or Ambassador Nevas Mumba was not wrong. He was not wrong in giving that report. And remember, SADC stood by that report. It was adopted, by the way. Even the media coverage, the report actually tells you that ZANU-PF dominated 73% and the opposition party and others got less than 30% media access to media coverage. And for sure, Zimbabwe suffers from a crisis of what we call media concentration, where the ruling party is utilizing all state media outlets to further their agenda and socialize their politics into the masses without giving opposition a fair chance. And they do it in saying that we've been given the exception from the public. ZANU-PF pursues a one-party state logic. So it will be very dishonest for anyone to claim that President Hakainde Hichilema, because he's now the head of the Troika on politics and of peace and politics, that he sponsored that report. He did not. That is a conspiracy theory, and it's a diplomatic blunder, especially from ZANU-PF as a governing party that would wish to work with Zambia. Because remember, Zambia is one country that links Zimbabwe to Central and Western and Eastern as well as Northern Africa. So that is stupid of the Zimbabwean government to make such claims. And I would say President Hakainde Hichilema's integrity should not be attacked by his counterparts. The Zimbabwean African National Union Patriotic Front, the ZANU-PF, should have the decorum enough to respect their counterparts, the UPND in Zambia, for the sake of diplomacy and progression in the region. But what they are doing right now, they're dividing the region unnecessarily. And it's very sad that the PF wants to thrive on that and they want to capitalize on that, yet not knowing that they're attracting themselves an unstrategic diplomatic relationship that may lead to them being sanctioned as well by associating themselves with the dictatorship. So it's a diplomatic blunder. And this is leading to the further isolation of my country, I'll tell you. Because right now, if Zambia doesn't associate with us, it will take long for other countries to associate with us, especially for a country that was preaching re-engagement with the West. And Zambia is a very good ally of the West in Southern Africa, even if I have my reservations based on ideological inclinations of the Look West policy of Zambia. But still, for Zimbabwe that is trying to charm the Commonwealth, to charm America and Britain, they are misfiring. And it is stupid to claim that President Hakainde Hichilema sponsored that report. No, SADC adopted that report. It was sponsored by SADC. And if anyone has a problem with it, they were given a chance to respond to it. So it's a non-event to claim it. What they have to do is to take note of the report, learn from it, implement the recommendations, and start treating opposition fair and allow democracy to prevail in Zimbabwe.
Speaking of that, let's get the real picture of Zimbabwean politics. How is the political landscape in Zimbabwe, and can we compare with Zambia, where Zambia, we are saying there's rule of law and democracy is at the height of it? How's the situation in Zimbabwe?
So I'll tell you that, like I told you already, ZANU-PF fantasizes of a one-party state. So when a political party fantasizes for a one-party state, I'll tell you that things are not okay. I've already told you the poverty rates in Zimbabwe, that 50% of Zimbabwe's population lives in absolute poverty and 70% lives in poverty. Then also you are talking of a country where even the Civicus tracker has actually said the civic space is repressed. It's a repressed environment. So that means that opposition political parties are not allowed the right to organize, they're not allowed the right to gather, and dissenting voices are silenced. We're talking of a country that has recorded a case of almost 1,000 citizens being killed under politically motivated violence. And we are talking of enforced disappearances of activists starting from since 2015 from Itai Zamara, from Mo Blessing Ali, from Masaya, from Tapumane Masaya, an opposition activist who died a week ago, who was killed because he supports the opposition. Even fellow MPs, like elected members of parliament, my friend, Honorable Takudzo Ngadzoro, who's the youngest MP in Zimbabwe, was abducted on camera in front of a live Instagram video at gunpoint, put in a sack and dumped in an unknown location. You see, all these things are happening. So the situation in Zimbabwe is very bad and it's bleak. Well, I will tell you that with no doubt that Zimbabwe is a dictatorship, and it is one country that has been failed by the international community, because countries like South Africa, especially under the ANC, keep on endorsing ZANU-PF's practices, and they keep on aligning themselves with the dictatorial regime that is ruining the country, because they benefit from getting free labor by the immigration that happens from Zimbabwe into neighboring countries. And South Africa is the biggest haven of Zimbabweans seeking economic refuge. See? And the ANC is failing us by being complicit in supporting a dictatorship party. And I'm not saying this out of conspiracy. No, the Secretary General of the ANC, when he was in Western Cape addressing a rally, he said that, in fact, the Provincial Congress, he said that there might be errors with ZANU-PF, but they are allies, and they will stand with ZANU-PF. They openly said it. So the ANC is complicit in the issues that are happening in Zimbabwe under ZANU-PF, and so is SWAPO in Namibia, because they endorsed the sham election. You see, so we have been failed by the international community. And right now, because of the use of violence, the use of terror, the use of error, citizens are demobilized, and there is fear of mobilizing to rise up against the dictatorship in Zimbabwe, like what Zambians have done, like what the Swati people tried to do, or like what the Sutu people in Lesotho have done, or even what happened in Congo when President Tshisekedi pushed out the regime of the political party that President Lorenzo Kabila led. You see? So that is the situation in Zimbabwe. And also we have people like me living in exile.
Thank you so much for that, Liam. Our dear viewer, remember that you are watching Meet Your Leaders on Ubuntu channel. This is a program that comes your way every Wednesday from 20 right about this time. And this evening we are discussing, is Zambia's democracy backsliding? My guest this evening is Liam, who is a political commentator, an international political commentator, as we get to look at obviously Zambia and the Southern African region in terms of how they play their politics, and also how they get to affiliate or relate with one another. Liam, after talking about that, Of course, we have seen Zambia is a member state of the African Union, is a member state of SADC, is a member state of the UN, and all these other universal bodies that cement the bilateral relationship between different countries, as long as they are member states of these particular organizations. Let's still talking about Zambia. Uh, let's get to zero in the fact that Zambia participated in the voting, in the UN voting against the war in Palestine, Israel versus Palestine. Zambia casted its vote, and of course, the vote did not please many people, and obviously, the war in Palestine and Israel is not something that is exciting in the eyes of any well-meaning human being on earth. What did you make of the vote that Zambia took participated on, especially when we backtrack the war again between Ukraine and Russia? Zambia did not actively participate in the voting, as they shunned the voting, but this time around Zambia actively participated in voting in this war, and obviously the position that was taken was that of Israel. It's okay for Israel to attack, or for Israel to engage in this war with the Palestine. What did you make of this? And apart from that, what what are the consequences for Zambia in taking an active role in participating on the UN vote against Palestine?
So, Lance, I'll tell you this from an ideological perspective. I'm a Pan-Africanist by orientation. I'm wired to always side with friends of Africa. But the fact that President Hakainde Hichilema and his government failed to understand what's happening to Ukraine is the same thing happening to Palestine is a cause of concern. And I'll tell you that the effects are that it attracts regional and continental as well as international hostility, especially amongst third world countries. And President Hakainde Hichilema forgets that he leads a third world country, a country in the global south. And countries in the global south stood with Palestine, because what is happening to Palestine happened to us one time or another during colonial eras. So President Hakainde Hichilema literally is trying to say what happened during colonization is right. And that's wrong. That's wrong of him and his government to assume so. He should come. President Hakainde Hichilema should give solidarity to the people of Palestine, because they are fighting a just cause. They are fighting a colonial power, the same way Zambia fought the British in 1964. You see? And I told you already that there is diplomatic hostility from fellow third world leaders, which will be economically costly, especially at the time when we are suffering a meal crisis in Zambia. And you know that most third world countries, especially those in Southern Africa, they grow maize meal, sorghum, and millets, which can be useful in making meal and supplying it to Zambia. So imagine what will happen now. Huh? So President Hakainde Hichilema is digging a diplomatic ditch.
Okay.
Chance to listen. I was still speaking. If President Hakainde Hichilema gets a chance to listen to this, I hope, these are my humble asks, that he changes his position on Israel. Because Israel is violating international law. It's violating Palestinians' right to territorial integrity and independence and freedom from unjust occupation. And President Hakainde Hichilema voting for Israel. It's wrong. 9,000 kids, 9,000 people, in fact, and 3,500 kids have died in Palestine. And only 1,500 people have died in the war in Ukraine. And if you vote in favor of Israel, that is using white sulfur bombs that were banned under international law in the early 2000s, then it's wrong. President Hakainde Hichilema is on the wrong side of history. He's on the white side of history instead. So we won't trust him with the decision of sending troops to Congo to kill the genocide happening. We won't trust him with the decision also to intervene in the conflict happening in southwestern Sahara. But also remember, what impact does this have? If President Akande Hichilema keeps on making these unstrategic missteps and blunders diplomatically, and especially with what he's doing at home in his domestic policy, he loses the moral ground to become the leader or the example of a democrat in the region, especially in holding rogue governments like the one in Zimbabwe accountable. And it then risks the lives of the 6 million plus people in Zimbabwe from realizing democratic breakthrough, because those people are counting on Zambia to come to their aid, just as Zambia came to our aid during the liberation struggle. But President Kaunda during that time was politically correct. He had the moral right to be the leader of the revolution in Southern Africa. But right now, President Hakainde Hichilema is blindly falling onto the wrong side, losing that moral obligation, that moral right or moral standing to be giving us solidarity. So that's what I make of it.
Okay, so South Africa has taken a step in closing the Israeli embassy in South Africa, and obviously the ambassador was recalled by Israel from South Africa, and President Ramaphosa today welcomed, or rather notched, the move which the parliamentarians took. What precedence does South Africa set for African countries in this war?
I might have my disagreements with the African National Congress, but I'll tell you that on this one, I praise them. It's for the first time they've shown solidarity with the oppressed people of the world. And the precedent that they set is that of boldness amongst Africans. As Africans, we should be bold enough to tell Western neoliberal capital to piss off, to go to hell. We should be economies in Africa have managed to do that, and at least they showed some sense of leadership. They've set an example, and I love that the EFF was also involved in agreeing on that vote. And I hope that my comrades in Zimbabwe will do the same. I hope that Botswana will do the same. I hope that Malawi will do the same. I hope that Namibia will do the same. So this shows that for the first time that African countries are taking a genuine stand to be in solidarity with the oppressed people. You see? And I really make of it that it's a good step. I might have my reservations on the ANC leadership at the moment, but I what can I say? I cannot say I praise them, but I acknowledge their success on that. I commend them for that progressive act. I commend them. Well, that was a good move. Israel should be held accountable. In Palestine.
Okay.
And I love that South Africa has led that conversation.
Okay, great. Well, Liam would have really loved to go on and on and on, but unfortunately, our time is not allowing. So otherwise, thank you so much for coming through. Hoping to have you again, but this time around, hopefully on picture, so that we can get to discuss more, especially on Pan-Africanism and the need or the route that African countries need to take in terms of obviously fighting imperialism and neo-colonialism.
Thank you for having me, Lance. But if you want to have me on picture, firstly guarantee my safety.
All right, thank you so much.
And thank guarantee you so that much. I won't be deported back for speaking my opinions.
Thank you so much, Liam, and to you, our dear viewer, thank you so much for taking time to watch this particular broadcast of Meet Your Leaders. This evening, I was playing host to Liam, who is a political commentator, international political commentator, who were discussing Zambia's democracy backsliding, and of course, took it to the region to discuss different issues that are affecting African countries, and of course, the support that is supposed to be given to those that need the support. I am your host, Lance Sani Banda, and this evening, network failed my co-host Chaza my co-host Chaza. He was supposed to be part of this particular broadcast, but unfortunately he couldn't be part of the broadcast. From the entire production and my producer Emmanuel Nkunika, we say have a pleasant evening and stay blessed. We're out of here.